For some more analysis, let's bring in Daniel Sims. He is an associate professor of First Nations Studies at the University of Northern British Columbia and joins us from Prince George, British Columbia. And appreciate you being there, Daniel. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Andrew.
So you were listening in on that press conference with us. What stood out to you?
I mean, what really stood out to me is this contradiction that's existed as a result of UNDRIP, as a result of reconciliation between what First Nations want and what the national government wants, and how far the national government is willing to kind of push things when it comes to things that First Nations are opposed to.
And so, yeah, because, I mean, Coastal First Nations, I think they were asked by a reporter, like, is there anything that will convince you otherwise that a pipeline could go through this coast? And it sure sounded to me like they said, no, this is that's it. That's it. Is that what you got?
Yeah, apologies for interrupting you earlier. Yeah, that's what I got from the press conference as well. It's very clear that the nations are opposed to the pipeline. They're opposed to increased tanker traffic. And, they tried to make that view very clear to the Prime Minister, that they are not interested in doing this, and that they don't necessarily see it as a transactional relationship where a certain amount of money or benefits or resources can be provided to them to actually make them drop their opposition. They also just don't believe the technology exists to clean up the spill. So it seems like it's a situation where they're opposed to it. And I'm not sure how the Prime Minister would move forward with the pipeline and get their free, prior, and informed consent.
Mm-hmm. And so how do you see this playing out? Because, I mean, this is happening in the context of a memorandum of understanding between the federal government and the Alberta government for a potential pipeline to the coast. It doesn't necessarily have to be the northwest coast, but that's the preference of the Premier of Alberta.
Yeah, I'm not sure how it will actually play out, and that's kind of one of the big things that I'm curious about as somebody who looks at resource development in Canada, particularly with regards to Indigenous communities. As was mentioned, UNDRIP only requires that the free informed consent be sought, not necessarily that it actually is given. And so it might be a situation where the federal government decides to push through on the project in support of Alberta, but it might also be a situation where the federal government is willing to maybe not go forward with the project in opposition to Alberta. And so I think it's a situation where the Prime Minister has to decide which option is the best, recognizing that there's not necessarily an ideal option at the moment. It is also possible that if enough time is given, that some sort of agreement could actually be reached where the province of Alberta and Coastal First Nations feel like they've been heard and that they do agree to what's happening. But I don't know how long that would take, and I don't know if it's actually possible.
Mm-hmm. And it's all happening in the context of Trump's trade war on Canada, on concerns around the economy. And, we've just had this readout from the Prime Minister saying that their discussions focused on how the federal government and Coastal First Nations can work in partnership to strengthen marine conservation, ocean protection, build a strong and sustainable economy. But then the next line is, our country's under threat, putting our economy, our sovereignty, and our way of life at risk. So when you hear that language, does it sound as though to you that there may be a determination on the federal government's part to push some kind of pipeline through?
There may be, and that's really kind of the question I've had since Trump was elected and inaugurated last year. By creating this threat towards Canada, it really raises the question of how serious Canada is towards reconciliation, towards decolonization, and indeed towards kind of fulfilling the promises or obligations posed by UNDRIP. And I think in my own province of British Columbia, we had the Premier talking about perhaps amending or repealing sections of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People Act, which committed the province to actually following through on UNDRIP. And this was made in response to this opposition and other opposition as well. So, it is a concerning time if you are somebody who believes that reconciliation and decolonization need to go forward or should be honored or should be respected.
What do you think happens next?
I'm not actually sure, to be honest. It seems like there's an impasse So on the one hand, Alberta is upset about the lack of pipelines. This has been an ongoing issue for many years. And so it did seem like by having the memorandum of understanding that perhaps impasse had been, passed, that the province was now happy potentially with the federal government. Danielle Smith spoke highly of the Prime Minister, which she hadn't necessarily done in the past. But knowing that coastal First Nations are opposed to the project, then, creates this situation where the memorandum of understanding may simply just be a memorandum of understanding. It doesn't actually lead to the pipeline going forward. Again, there's also the question of whether or not the federal government will actually push forward on the pipeline. And with regards to either option, it also raises questions of whether or not there'll be any sort of litigation surrounding the decision to move forward or the decision not to move forward.
And we heard the First Nations leaders saying that they're considering those options should this go forward. Daniel, it was really interesting to get your insight. Thank you. That was Daniel Sims, an Associate Professor of First Nations Studies at the University of Northern British Columbia.
Thank you.